Let's do Utah, Dallas, which
Yes.
the caveat here is Luka Doncic has that high ankle sprain or strained left calf, excuse me. And the Mavs have not, as of this recording, announced when he's going to be back or a timetable for his return. He's
Mhm.
basically been listed as day to day, which seems, part and parcel of this type of injury. In street clothes, Jeff Stotts had talked about like players have returned in as little as 3 days. And then the Mavericks dealt with, I can't remember who he said on the roster had the similar injury this season, but they missed like 12 or 14 days or whatever it was. As long as it's not extensive, like I'd be shocked if Luka isn't playing in game one. I'd be really shocked if he wasn't playing by game two. And so with the
Yeah.
specter of his injury looming over the series, like what are just your overarching thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, that is the big question. And I like props to Vegas for having a line out right now on this series because I'd be terrified to make a prediction or bet on this, not knowing if or when Luke is going to come back. It's like it is simple enough to say if he misses the whole series or if he misses even a couple of games of the series, that swings it heavily in Utah's favor. But if he's, there in game one, and, the good thing about his game is that he's not overly reliant. He's not John Morant, not overly reliant on his athleticism or his explosiveness. Like he's going to kind of lumber his way to the basket anyway. So if he can continue to do that, that makes this, I think much more of a toss up than what the current lines would suggest. So like Utah is a decent favorite in the series, but I think that is factoring in the possibility of Luka missing some or all of it.
Yeah, I mean, his ankle or I keep calling it ankle. What is wrong with me? His calf strain is clearly the biggest question in the series. I'm going to just assume that the Mavericks are at full strength some point. My biggest
Sure.
question is this team, even though they have Luka, maybe not built to exploit the Jazz's defense as much as other teams would be? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not taking a pot shot against Gobert. It's just that where the Jazz have struggled, the two areas we're looking at is just athleticism. And so Rudy Gobert has so much responsibility because guys in the perimeter can't stay in front of their other guys. Or if you want to bring him higher, he's fully capable of doing that. They also just don't have like the players behind him as help rim protectors that allow them to do that. The other thing though is that they can be beaten in transition, like off of misses. Like they can be, and especially off of turnover, but off of misses, they can be beaten in transition. I would argue because it's not Rudy Gobert's primary. Like if you want him to be under the glass at all, or if he's going to be so close to the basket, it's going to be harder for him to get back than all
Mm-hmm.
the other guys. The Mavericks, even post trade deadline, like this is not a team that's looking to get out in transition. And so I'm just wondering if that gives them more time to sort of set up Utah to set up their defense. And whereas if this were a Clippers team that could play smaller, or if it was a Minnesota team, if it was the Warriors, there are just all these other teams that I think might be better equipped to exacerbate our biggest concerns about the Jazz. And I don't know if if that should make the Jazz favorites in this series, even if Luka is playing. We know that he's going to get in the half court and he will just pick them apart at points.
Right.
But there's just like, if they're set, like there's just so much of a difference there for them.
Yeah, I just looked it up. The Mavericks were 29th in frequency of transition opportunities throughout the regular season,
They were,
28th.
they climbed all the way to 26th after the trade deadline, though.
Oh, wow. Big. Yeah, they were tied with Houston for dead last. So it's a good shout there. And you're right. I mean, I think, what we've seen foil the Jazz in recent postseasons probably won't be as much of a factor in this series as it would be, presuming that the Suns move on in a potential second round series for them, where I would have great concern over their ability to corral Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, so on and so forth. The Mavericks do have that guard trio of Doncic, Jalen Brunson, and Spencer Dinwiddie now. But again, like Dinwiddie is also not an explosive athlete who's going to, roast you off the dribble and like be past Gobert by the time he has a chance to rotate back over. Like I would think he would have time to get back into position by the time Spencer Dinwiddie got to the basket. Brunson is probably the big concern there. I do wonder if the Jazz have the personnel to contain Luka. And I think that's probably the biggest concern on their part. Royce O'Neal is 6'4", 226. So he's going to be giving up a couple inches on Luka. And Lord knows Luka is not afraid to shoot those step back threes at a moment's notice. Mitchell and Conley are both 6'1". Bojan Bogdanovic is not anyone's idea of a wing stopper. So, Rudy Gay has been in and out of the rotation. Like maybe it's a Daniel House series. Like that might be, other than Royce O'Neal, Daniel House might be Utah's best option against Luka, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with you, because if you had to ask me who spends the second largest share of possessions guarding Luka at this point on the Jazz, I'm going to pick Daniel House. Like, it can't be Conley or Mitchell. You don't want it to be Bojan Bogdanovic. It definitely can't be Jordan Clarkson. So yeah, I think like this is a Daniel House series. Insofar as that can be a Daniel House series in 2022. This is a Daniel House series. And to be fair, like he did give Utah some like spiffy minutes. They picked him up. But that's just like, if we're talking, we're back to the discussion of should they have stood basically pat at the deadline or done more than just aim for tax savings? And the answer is yes, they should have done more than that. I'm like simultaneously shocked. I looked up before we were doing this how many possessions the Mavericks have rolled out their three guards together, and it was 226 possessions, which was higher than I expected, but like still too low for me. Yeah. And I'm just like, if you went to that look, if you're Dallas, and yeah, there's the issue of rounding out the rest of the lineup. You're probably going with Finney-Smith is definitely in every single one of those looks, and then I'm assuming you'll just go Kleba or Powell to have an actual big. I don't know if you're not brazen enough to go with Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock. Like the Jazz are going to have Rudy Gobert on the court for 90% of this series. If you went to that though, the individual matchups start to get even more difficult for Utah because it's O'Neal on Luka. I guess you put House on Brunson, or would it be Dinwiddie? Like he's on one of those two. And then it's like, okay, maybe you put him on Brunson because Brunson's so much quicker than Dinwiddie. And then it's, oh, okay, like Donovan Mitchell or Conley or Bojan Bogdanovic has to chase around, but like Spencer Dinwiddie, I don't know. Maybe Conley's capable of handling the Dinwiddie assignment. And so perhaps I'm overstating the significance of if the Mavericks decided to go to this three-guard look. But I think that's one way that they could make Utah really uncomfortable in this series, given that they don't have the typical small ball lineups that could do the same like other teams do. And again, I want to make it clear, I don't think Rudy Gobert is the issue in those small ball lineups. It is pretty much everything else about the Jazz that is the issue.
Yeah, right. Correct. And I agree with you. That would not, like, there's always like one big mid-series adjustment, especially for a team that's like down 2-1 or 3-0. I think that is the obvious one for Dallas to try to make. That said, I mean, if Reggie Bullock is knocking down his shots, I know he's been somewhat inconsistent this year. Like he is going to get the starting nod at the start of the series next to Brunson and, knock on wood, next to Luka as well, assuming health. But yeah, I mean, I think the more ball handlers you have on the floor, especially against a Jazz team that really struggles to contain the dribble, the better off you're going to be.
How do you feel about this series from a Donovan Mitchell perspective?
I mean, you go back to it feels similar to Memphis, Minnesota, where it's like both teams just don't really have a ton of great answers against either of their other stars. So like, go back to, if we're assuming Brunson, Bullock, Doncic, Finney-Smith, Powell are starting, like I'm assuming Finney-Smith gets the Mitchell assignment because there just isn't another great option in that starting five.
I think I have to agree with you there. When you play Finney-Smith and Bullock together, Bullock could do it. Like he defends a lot of smaller guards, but Dorian Finney-Smith is the type of defender where I didn't mention him as honorable mentions when we did our all defense, and I should have. Like he's the guy that's just like whoever the best player on the other team is, short of them being maybe a center, just Dorian Finney-Smith, go guard them. Like,
right. But and part of it's out of necessity too, because they just don't really have, with all due respect to your boy Frankie Smokes, they like
hey.
they don't have the personnel they don't have that like lockdown wing defender on this roster other than him, or like a lockdown guard defender. They don't have a Patrick Beverly or a Marcus Smart on this team. Like, it is all right, Finney-Smith or bust.
Thank you for actualizing what I was thinking, that this is a Frankie Smoke series. This is a Frankie Ntilikina series if there ever was one. Anything we missed or any other bigger questions that you have before I ask you about your X factors?
This is just an overall general question about Utah, but given all that has happened with them throughout the season, throughout the last couple years, I do wonder whether the weight of expectations are going to be hanging over them. And maybe that is the X factor if we're going into the more intangible. But I'm also curious, Quinn Snyder just gave a 19-minute soliloquy the other day about this concern about Donovan Mitchell not passing to Rudy Gobert, or them not utilizing Rudy Gobert offensively. But
they eat lunch together. It's fine sometimes.
But if they lose this first round series, especially if Luka is hobbled, you have to figure big changes are coming to Utah this summer. So I'm curious, especially because if they're gonna pick between the two, they're probably keeping Donovan and trading Rudy. So does Rudy go into this series knowing it might be his last stand in Utah? And does he look to assert himself more offensively than he has recently? Because, Powell and Kleber are both 6'10", but Gobert's going to have a height advantage over both of them. So if they can find him, if they can utilize him more, I'm not saying they should be running 20 post-ups for Rudy Gobert or anything like that. But if he establishes really deep post position and all he has to do is turn around and reach over these guys, can they actually take advantage of that?
I was actually going to ask, that was my kind of my last question here is this a Rudy Gobert series? Because I think on offense, they don't really have anyone that could stop what he's going to do on screen and dives. This data is skewed because the Mavs overhauled their roster at the middle of the season. Rudy Gobert's 79.4 true shooting against the Mavs. Where most of those shots are coming from.
Yeah.
It doesn't get any easier if it's going to be Dwight Powell has some balance to him and Maxi Kleber's all over the place. It's just having to task them with guarding Rudy Gobert in pick and rolls. That's not, I don't know how much I would trust that. On the flip side though, if you wanted to make the Jazz further uncomfortable, and one of these is realistic, Maxi Kleber as your big, just as someone who does have a little bit of a pump and drive game and can space the floor. But also, is this this is tongue in cheek a little bit because I know he hasn't played a ton, but is this a Davis Bertans series because of the motion shooting he provides you? Where if you just test that out, maybe go with me. Maybe you have it when it's Dinwiddie, Bullock, and Dorian Finney-Smith are on the court. Just three guys who you can at least trust defensively. And I know I'm being generous there with Spencer Dinwiddie. I want to make that clear. Having him fly around, just because I know he hasn't been a lights out shooter this year, and he can get torched himself defensively, but there's a chance that Rudy Gobert is going to do that to you anyway on offense. Do you just try that? Because it makes, even if it doesn't make Rudy Gobert uncomfortable, it makes the scope of his responsibility untenable because of the complexion of the rest of the Jazz roster. And it's just a question. And if you're not going to have Luka for even one game, you have to try it out. That's where I'm at. Especially if you're not going to have Luka, but even if you do, you might need to just try it out.
To be clear, I wasn't laughing because of the idea. I was already envisioning the Twitter slander that would come out if a Davis Bertans unit against Gobert is, what swings a game. There would be no coming back from that. The Jazz would just have to, they shouldn't even show up for the rest of the series after that. That would just be the thing that completely broke them. But yeah, you might as well. Yeah, we've seen the formula to beat the Jazz in the playoffs, and
that's let them get out to a 2-game lead. Yeah.
Right. And I know people who have been following this team all year have pointed out, they blow double-digit leads a lot. They just seem somewhat mentally fragile, probably again because of the weight of expectations and knowing what lies ahead if they crumble in the first round here. So if you can do something that gets into their head and, throw out an unconventional lineup that has some success, and then they start thinking, oh no, here we go again. Like that, winning the mental battle here is going to be a large part of who wins this series, I think.
Who is your X factor for Dallas?
Finney-Smith, I don't know if he counts as an X factor, but if he has any success against Donovan Mitchell, I think that's going to be a huge key to this series, because we've seen Mitchell in the playoffs. He goes just absolutely supernova. Now I want to say Davis Bertans just because you brought him up.
I like that the idea to you at least wasn't so egregious.
No, I was really like just already imagining the volume of slander, because people are ready to bury this team. That would do it.
I just look, if people are going to insult the opinion, I just want it to be clear that it was not a Rudy Gobert thing so much as a let's fuck with the rest of the Jazz's roster thing.
Right. And I think it's worth a try. Finney-Smith for defense, and then probably Dinwiddie offensively, because he's just been such a revelation for this team, especially relative to what he showed in Washington earlier this year. And as you mentioned, if they do trot out these 3-guard lineups, or if Luka misses a game, he probably gets promoted into the starting lineup in Luka's place. So I think he's going to have a big role in the series.
I am going to go with Reggie Bullock, basically for the reasons that you just mentioned, because if it's not going to be Dorian Finney-Smith and Donovan Mitchell, it's probably going to be Reggie Bullock, but you're also going to see him go up against Mike Conley as well. So maybe he's going to get time against Bojan Bogdanovic, who, look, I know there are people want to troll Bogdanovic, but sometimes we don't need to overcomplicate the fact that when he was healthy, 17 plus points per game on 60 plus true shooting, we don't need to overcomplicate that. That's really valuable as a secondary weapon. And so we know what we're going to get from Dorian Finney-Smith, who, by the way, spent the second most time of anyone in the league defending Donovan Mitchell this year.
Oh, there you go.
I bet you could guess the first.
Is it also Patrick Beverley?
No, it's Herb Jones.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So we know what Dorian Finney-Smith is going to have to do. And so I land there with Bullock, where it's, if he's hitting his threes like he did for, I don't want to say the better part of this season, but definitely was better over the second half than the first half. And you're able to get those minutes defensively from him, where he's not going to win those matchups maybe ever, but to make life difficult on them, especially on Mike Conley, who has quietly, if he's finding time with him, has quietly been borderline brilliant through stretches this season. Who's your X factor for the Jazz? Is it also Davis Bertans?
I think it's the guy who'd probably be guarding him. I think it's Bogdanovic. You just brought him up, but when we talk about the Jazz perimeter weak links defensively, you might as well just be subtweeting Bogdanovic over these last couple playoff series. So I don't think he's going to be on Luka, but maybe he's on Dorian Finney-Smith. It's if they run these 3-guard lineups, is there a place for him on the floor? Do they play him off the floor? So can he justify staying on the floor with his offense? Can he provide enough offense to, make Quinn Snyder keep him out there, even if he doesn't have a clear, obvious matchup defensively? And then if and when he does, can he hold his own? Can he prevent these corner threes from Dorian Finney-Smith that enable him to stay out on the court to guard Donovan Mitchell? So it's I don't know what type of, a game of Connect 4 almost. You're trying to block the other team from trying to use their best options, and I guess best or worst options in this case with Bogdanovic defensively. I think I'm going him.
I'm worried this is too high profile, but I think it's Mike Conley for me for the Jazz, just because he's clearly important to what you do on offense. He is your connective tissue on offense more than Donovan Mitchell as a playmaker. And if Donovan Mitchell has a bad game, it's going to be him or Bogdanovic needs to pick up the slack. And then they have Jordan Clarkson, obviously. I'm just more so talking about Dallas now has more dangerous secondary weapons within their own offense, with having there's a trickle down effect to having Spencer Dinwiddie. It makes life a little bit easier on Luka, But like now you also don't need to be in a postseason series where Jalen Brunson is technically your number 2 because he's just a little bit undersized. And if he's your number 3 instead of your number 2, you're just deeper. And Mike Conley's just going to have to defend basically all those dudes. And I would assume most likely Dinwiddie in just certain lineups or just see a bunch of time on Brunson. And so he becomes important to the Jazz's perimeter defense because you already mentioned it with Bojan Bogdanovic. You're going to look to stash him on some of the Jazz's more stationary players. And look, maybe that's why you just roll out Davis Bertans next to Maxi Kleber or Dwight Powell. Like, are you going to try and get yourself in a situation where Bojan Bogdanovic has to move a bunch? You know, we can talk about the lore of that time while he was with the Pacers. He played okay defense on LeBron James, but that was a half decade ago.
Right.
The Jazz are still an elite defensive team. Rudy Gobert is on the court, but they need, like, aside from Royce O'Neal, who he would be another good choice as an X factor because they just need him to do everything. You need to guard Luka for every single minute that Luka's on the court. But I just think it's Mike Conley because he might be, I know we named Daniel House, but like he might be Utah's second most important perimeter defender at this point, and in this series specifically.
Yeah. I mean, there are going to be a lot of. It's like what you're getting out of your stars at this point. I think the complementary guys might be what swing this either way. Again, assuming health for Luka.
Let's do Boston, Brooklyn, just to go back to the East for a second.
Are we going to make picks for? You just don't want to make picks for?
Oh my God! Dallas, yes, let's make picks. All right, who is your pick for Jazz Mavericks?
I thought you were just like let's avoid the scorn of Jazz Twitter if we pick against them, but I mean, so much of this depends on Luka's health. Like it's almost impossible to say, not knowing how much he's going to miss, if any, of this series. If he's fully healthy, I lean Dallas, or if he plays all 7 games, I lean Dallas. But I will hedge and say Dallas in 7. Assuming that he misses 1 game or just isn't like fully recovered from that, isn't 100%. But I don't know, man. This Jazz team, just the vibes are not good, and they have not been good all season. And I know Dallas is not the team like the Clippers last year. Like, you're not going to see a 5-out lineup unless, hey, maybe they do Bertans at the 5. That could be really fun. But I just don't have any faith in this Jazz team, honestly.
Of note to everything you said, the Mavs are plus 8.5 points per 100 possessions when Jalen Brunson and Spencer Dinwiddie play without Luka.
There you go.
I don't think that holds over the course of a series without Luka, but those are important minutes if you want to, play Luka fewer than 42 minutes a game. That might be a little bit important. I'm going to go Jazz in 7 here because I'm skeptical as to how much Luka plays or what he looks like upon returning. I don't feel comfortable with that pick. As a fan of chaos, I'm going to pick Mavericks in 5 because just as someone who roots for chaos, that would be losing in like 5 games. You just know that Utah is going to be blown to smithereens.
Yeah.
Quinn Snyder is going to have both feet out the door after this series. But I do think that the Jazz they're the more dangerous offensive team to me. Despite the Mavs have Luka, and that's like playoff proof. But I think the discourse around Donovan Mitchell's game is veered, or at times is veered too far away from reality. He's proven that he can be hyper valuable in the playoffs. And so you have that go-to guy there. And there are more, even if there aren't more secondary weapons in number necessarily. I mean, there are Jordan Clarkson, Bojan Bogdanovic, Mike Conley. There are more secondary weapons in number and like just establishment. Like when you look at Bojan Bogdanovic and Mike Conley, I would feel a little bit better about the Jazz if it wasn't for, as you mentioned, the vibes. And maybe we need to do a vibes check here. And I'm underweighting it. I'm just going to pick Utah in 7. And it has everything to do with the Luka Doncic difference. If you tell me that Luka plays, if Luka is the Luka he's been for basically since early November, or more specifically, the last half of the season, which, by the way, he shot 48.1% on step back threes over his final 36 games. That's sources tell me that's pretty good.
Better than James Harden.
If you tell me Luka is Luka, I might actually just lean Dallas in 7 because of how good they've been defensively almost all year. And like Spencer Dinwiddie's been, you already mentioned it, playing out of his mind. But my official pick is going to be Jazz in 7. I'm prepared to be wrong. No.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like it's impossible to predict without knowing the stat. Like if Luka misses 3 games, I also pick the Jazz, but I'm hoping / assuming that he will be like miss 1 game at most.